because I have to work immediately. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Blerdkast Live. Tonight, we have a good one for you on this day that we celebrate all of Star Wars. We're going to talk about old sci-fi as well. And on tonight's episode, we have sci-fi people in nerdy spaces. And tonight, I have a panel of guests who all do some amazing things in the genre of sci-fi. So let's go ahead and introduce them. I'm going to start with my man in this direction, Mr. Tony Cade. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, see, on my screen, I'm actually in this direction. Okay. All right. Well, hey, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tony Cade. I'm the owner of Challenges Games and Comics. I'm also the founder of the Atlanta Sci-Fi and Fantasy Expo. And every once in a while, I'm an independent comic publisher. I've been doing a comics thing as far as publishing for like 20 plus years. Been a retailer for over 30 years. And I've been involved in Atlanta fandom since the mid-'80s.
Perfect. And yes, you have been involved in a lot of nerdy fandom things that we're going to get into. But first, let's go to the other direction. Miss RJ, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is J Atkinson. I am the author and creator of a series named The Seven Kingdom. I'm also the founder of RPX Media Production, publishing company. And it's good to be here. I'm excited as always.
Perfect. I am so happy to have you back on the show. And speaking of people who I'm happy to see again, Dr. Glenn Parris, how are you doing today?
I am doing fine. How are you doing?
I am wonderful. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So, Marcus has interviewed me before. I've got a kind of long introduction. So I write science fiction, science fantasy, crime fiction, young adult, historic horror. So I've done quite a few different things. But right now, my sort of vanguard is the Ifalu saga, starting with the Exodus Heresy and followed up with Dragon's Heir, the Archaeologist's Tale. And it's a tale of a history before history, a people who lived before the meteor hit and evacuated and left us behind to die. And then the second book is when they come back and they encounter people that they never expected to encounter. And it's Afrocentric.
That is amazing. And I actually have the first 2 volumes of that. So I am going to get into that very soon. So thank you so much for coming on to the actual podcast this time. I know we've done interviews before, but thank you for coming on to the podcast. And last but not least.
Well, hold on.
What?
Dan has to tell everybody what he does with his day job.
Oh, okay.
That's one of the things that fascinates me about both him and Milton. Is what they do as far as their writing, but what they do for their day jobs.
Okay, so some people have questioned my bona fides for writing science fiction. So I'm a rheumatologist, immunologist. I've been engaged in medical research for the past 25 years. I've taught at Emory School of Medicine, Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, and Morehouse School of Medicine. And I've gone to school with a number of people who are well-recognized scientists. So, for as far as science fiction is concerned, I think that I've got a little bit of a background for writing science fiction.
100% agree. 100% agree. Thank you, Supreme Attorney, for that. Before we begin, let's not forget our last guest on the panel, Mr. Robert Jeffries. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, my name's Robert Jeffrey. I am a freelance writer based out of Georgia. I've been freelance writing for 20 years. Some of my clients include DC Comics, 133 Art, a video game developer by the name of Blowfish Studios, and the Atlanta Voice newspaper. So I call myself a hired gun, but I also do create our own comic books, such as Route 3 and the Crossing. So I'm a sci-fi head, love Star Trek, but also love writing science fiction, wherever I can get an opportunity to, and I am happy to be here with this esteemed panel of writers and creatives, and thanks for the invite.
No worries, no worries. And again,
Robert, aren't you an award-winning writer?
Tony, are you like the MC for the night? Like,
I'm just saying, you guys need to be pumping yourselves on here.
I mean,
Tony,
Tony, I said 20 years of writing comic books and books, and I said DC Comics. So I mean, I'm like, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Let's hand the mic back to Mark for a minute.
No, it's all perfect. Tony's just trying to get you to hype yourself up, because that's what this whole channel is about, is promoting yourself. And this whole episode is about people like yourselves who are in science fiction, who are actively contributing to the genre of science fiction. And that's where I want to begin. I would like to know from each and single one of you, what got you into science fiction? Was it a show? Was it a comic? Was it a book? What was the one thing that got you into the genre of science fiction?
who wants to go first?
I
guess I'll go first. Okay. All right. What got me into sci-fi? My mama. Okay. My mama had me watching reruns of the original Star Trek, the original series. Okay. And I love me some Star Trek. I am one of those people that's actually old enough that I watched reruns of the original series, but then I watched first run of every series, including the animated series when it first came out. I've watched every single episode of Star Trek that's been on TV.
Now, see, Tony's making me feel old, because I watched the original series live back in 1965, 66, 67. So I didn't see the reruns. I saw first run.
Anybody else? RJ, Robert, y'all want to answer the question?
I'd have to say for me it was my dad who got me into it. My dad was a huge, actually, ironically, Dad was a Star Wars fan, but I was raised watching Star Trek. I watched like the 90s version with what's his name? Patrick Stewart playing like Jean-Luc Picard, and like that particular era. And I think my mom gave me a bit of a fascination for it too. My mother was a chemical engineer, and some of the things that I learned in school, she sometimes gave me like a little more application for it. So I think between the two of them, they both kind of immersed me into that world. And then from the perspective of film, being a filmmaker, I think I always had a fascination for sci-fi movies in general, like Minority Report, things like that. So like just last night I was watching the Fifth Element. So yeah.
That's a fun movie.
Yeah, it's a classic. It is a classic movie. We'll get there. Robert, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think my love of sci-fi comes from reading. So as a kid, like my mom would take us to the library and to Walgreens to pick up comic books because we didn't have a comic book store, on our side of town. And especially, picking up books, I kind of delved a bit more into the world of science fiction. And after that, with comic books like, say Xavier's Institute with the X-Men, but then also, like everybody said on here, Star Trek. I'm a 80s baby. So for me, my Star Trek would have been The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. So, and then Deep Space Nine became like my primary track. So that kind of really pushed me into science fiction, but then also the movies that we grew up watching, things like Back to the Future, the Star Trek films, and then The Matrix, was definitely game changing. So it was a variety of things, I would say, but definitely, like we all said, Star Trek was at the forefront of that. When it comes to loving science fiction.
That's fascinating. Like you, I'm a 80s baby, but product of the 90s, and I definitely remember watching the Next Generation growing up, and that having an effect on me. But I also remember being too young to understand the nuance of the storytelling that was Star Trek. So for me, it was Star Trek, but a combination of like Star Wars, because again, late 80s, early 90s, that's kind of was one of the big craze at the time. And a bunch of other things that came out over that course of time. Growing up in the 90s, of course, you're exposed to a lot of cartoons and the advent of anime and fantasy cultures, like I said, anime, manga, and things like that. So I feel growing up, there was nothing but science fiction out there to be interested in, and it was something else. The Scholastic Book Fair that we had. I don't know if any of you went to school in the 90s, but we had the Scholastic Book Fair, and there I got introduced to like book series like Goosebumps, Animorphs is my favorite, and a bunch of other really nerdy sci-fi things like Power Rangers. We're going to get into that too. But the next question I want to ask everyone is, what is your favorite sci-fi IP? I know this is May the 4th, it's Star Wars Day. We're going to talk about Star Wars, but what is your favorite, hands down, science fiction IP?
I'll double dutch in. I'm just going to say Star Trek. I'm not trying to be sacrilegious on May the 4th, because I love a good space opera. But Trek will always be my favorite sci-fi IP, but also my favorite IP. So, but yeah, I love everything. Well, there are things about Trek that I have some issues with, but I love Star Trek.
Okay.
Alien.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Down to like the original video game for PlayStation, like even down to that. Loved it.
Okay. What is it about?
I gotta say, Battlestar Galactica, the reboot.
Ooh, Battlestar Galactica, that's a good one too. I do remember that a lot growing up, more than Geordie LaForge and the Next Generation. But again, I think Babylon 5 had more flashiness to it than Star Trek did.
Oh, okay. You're about to get into it like a different conversation here. All right. Well, I definitely want to talk about the comparisons of Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine. All right. My favorite franchise, got to go back to Star Trek. Now, my favorite movie, sci-fi movie, is Aliens, followed by Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan. Those are my top two sci-fi movies. But Aliens is number one. I will sit down and watch that anytime it is on. The extended version, everything. Aliens is awesome.
I gotta say The Matrix.
Mm.
Gotta say The Matrix.
Oh, yes, that's another good one. Yeah.
Now, are you talking about the movie itself or the novel that also inspired the movie?
For Matrix?
Yes.
No, I say the movie.
Okay.
Yeah, I've not read the novel, but the movie, especially the first and the second one for me, I love those.
Okay. Matrix
I learned in middle school not to read any of the original novels of any other IPs because I'm just going to be disappointed.
Why?
It's like Jurassic Park is a good movie, but if you read the Jurassic Park book and then you go back and watch the movie's not that good.
I agree to that. I have read the books that inspired Jurassic Park, and there's something there that like I wish they just added to the movies, but at the same time, like I don't think it discredits the movie by any chance. But if you read the book and then saw the movie, you would be kind of disappointed.
What's wrong with the Supreme Attorney? She just posted that she's never watched Alien.
Something's wrong with her. She needs to you need to take her into a room and just strap her down so that she can watch all the things she's missed over
proper eyes open with
years.
And, that sounds like a party she needs to have. She needs to watch Alien and Aliens back to back.
That's true. Back to back.
That's true.
They're two different movies too. I mean, they're very.
One's a horror movie, the other one's sci-fi adventure.
Right.
But she did ask a question I would like to propose to the panel that we can probably discuss. Why is there beef between Star Trek fans and Star Wars fans? Because that has been literally one of the biblical arguments of my generation. Next to Picard or Stewart, well, Stewart is Picard. Next to Kirk or Picard, it's Star Trek or Star Wars. So anybody want to jump into that beef battle?
So I'm gonna say another sacrilege take. I don't think there's a beef. I think it's a manufactured like fandom thing. I think one of the things that I will always say is that they're two different. The only thing similar between those two properties is that they both take place in space and they have star, star in the title. And you can. There are things that like moral, social issues, discussions that are similar between the two, but they're both different, and you can appreciate them both for being what they are. Like Star Wars to me has always been rock and roll, right? And Star Trek has always been jazz. So if you go into both of those franchises with that mindset, then you can enjoy like a lot. Like one of the things that I will say about more the Star Wars for like recent years, things like Andor, I've been getting my social and political commentary from that series, like to the point where when I hear Star Wars fans talk about Star Wars being so woke, I'm like, what are y'all watching? The same thing with Trek, so I think that, and I'm sorry, I get tired of the arguments. I think the older I get tired of like, who can beat Goku? And I'm just like, the writer determines that. I get tired of like the Star Wars versus Star Trek. And I know there's endless threads filled with stuff like that, but you can appreciate, stuff from each, but you can also, have some constructive criticism of both. So like I said, I'm a space opera fan. I love Star Trek more, but I still enjoy watching, like I'm watching Maul right now. That is like it is a beautiful series, beautiful animated series. And then I'll go and watch, Starfleet Academy. So it's like the best of both worlds. But I don't know, like I've never really seen as much of a beef. And if I have, I just go the other way or close the thread. But that's just me.
I feel like I feel that it has to do with the fact that they're both trend-setting and they were both landmark sci-fi series that has an aesthetic that kind of appeals to two different, because I think I had read that Star Trek presented more of like a cyber prep aesthetic, whereas Star Wars became known for like the used future aesthetic. And for people who like sci-fi, that kind of gave them a variety and kind of a palette for the different presentations. And so naturally with those options is kind of like how there's some people who prefer a Lincoln over a Ford. They're in the same lane to some extent, but there are some differences that naturally divvy the audience. And then naturally with that divide comes a tendency to compare and contrast and be competitive and say this is better for that reason, when it's like was said before, it's a matter of palette, it's a matter of taste. But both of them were socially relevant, either in their presentation or in their symbolism or in what they did for their time period, whether it was technologically or on a social perspective, with like, for example, Star Trek, how it presented this very diverse cast during a time when diversity was not a thing that was presented. Matter of fact, it was a bold statement saying that the future can be a time and place when skin color doesn't matter and literally species doesn't matter, when society was in fact so divided already. So they were both trendsetting in that regard.
Yeah, my take, if you will, on the two, I'm very comfortable with both of them, and I see Star Trek as science fiction and reflecting a lot of the mores and the social challenges of our day from the 50s through current time. Whereas Star Wars strikes me more as science fantasy, and it's more of a spiritual, religious kind of basis, and it really doesn't connect directly with our time. It's a galaxy far, far away, and time long, long ago. There's no thread that connects directly with our world. So that's kind of the way I separate them. They're two different things.
All right, for me and stuff, I like to think about. I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? Yeah.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. Get that
Neil
right.
deGrasse Tyson. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of my boys. That's one of my classmates.
Oh, awesome. All right. He pointed it out and stuff that I thought was like pretty entertaining and pretty accurate. It kind of like depends on what you're really into. Whereas like Star Trek is fake science. And you have Star Trek, which is fake fantasy. All right. And the two can meet, but they're two different things. So you have to appreciate both of them for what they are. Like I said, I was in middle school and actually went and saw Star Wars in the theater back in 1977. As big of a Star Trek fan that I am, watching Luke and all those guys have their little space, Western, to me, it was like a Western adventure.
Yeah.
It was like you took a Western with some Asian stuff that you stole, and that's Star Wars, And like I said, it was kind of like, a belief system with the Force and all this other kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, unfortunately, he went and messed everything up when he brought up the whole metachlorian thing and everything like that. It's like, dude, you had this great creation and you messed up your own mythos.
The first trilogy was the greatest.
And I have to, look at Lucas, and I also have to look at Gene Roddenberry. And they both created great worlds, but other people took those worlds to supreme levels.
Right.
Because if left in both of their hands, it would have crumbled, both of them.
Right.
I mean,
They ran dry. Ideas ran dry.
Well, I was going to say, like, to that point, looking at Star Wars, and for May the 4th, we're living now in an era where they call it the Favreau-Filoni era. So where we have The Mandalorian, what else? Ahsoka live action, Andor. And so like they're bringing in, they did a really good job, especially with Filoni, of trusting in people who have seen this franchise grow, who love it, and modernizing it and creating a new generation of fans for it. So I think that's a beautiful thing. Like you said, you can have these two universes that are given life, by these two great people. Because I sometimes, like, I always had the feeling like with the Phantom Menace, nobody wanted to tell Lucas, like, maybe we shouldn't have, somebody like shucking and jiving, or whatever, as far as with certain characters. But like when you watch the behind the scenes stuff, it's just like they just like kind of letting him do his thing. And like now it seems like they have built that network of producers and directors and writers who are just like, this is what I grew up on, this is what I love. Let's continue it forward for a newer generation. And we see a lot of that even with like Star Trek, with things like Starfleet Academy and Prodigy, because my biggest thing is we have to find ways to bring other generations into these franchises that we love. I think more so with Star Trek rather than Star Wars, because I think Star Wars is always going to be okay. But yeah, so shout out to Filoni.
Yeah, Star Wars has definitely done a better job bringing along new generations than Star Trek has.
I think that's because Star Trek in itself just feels like it. Just from my perspective, it feels like Star Wars has a lower bar to entry than, say, Star Trek does. If you're just like a fan trying to get into it, I understand everything that Star Trek has gone through over the past, let's say, 16, 17 years with the advent of the new Star Trek movies that really revitalized that IP during that time, and the new series that we have got from that versus what Disney has done with Star Trek, or George Lucas and all, or Star Wars. I'm sorry, because Star Wars is just high science fantasy. I feel like that's easier to grasp than the concept of a futuristic Earth traveling through space with more science and more nuance and storytelling than just space lasers. I'm just calling that space swords with lasers. It's flashy, like Jeffrey said. Like Robert said. Star Wars is rock and roll. 100%, I agree with that. Yeah. But Star Trek is jazz. That is probably the best analogy I've heard for those two.
I like that. I like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, it's.
I'm going to steal that just to let you know.
Oh, I mean, go ahead. I mean, I ain't getting paid for it, so I just,
One of the interesting things that we brought up is the fact that Tony said, I think that Star Wars is sort of like a Western, but if you remember the way Star Trek was sold to NBC, it was Wagon Train to the Stars.
To the stars, yep.
Yeah, we all know he lied.
Yeah, because it wasn't. But Star Wars kind of was.
I think too, it makes a difference like who got what, because knowing Disney, when you look at Disney's approach to any of their IP, the way they market, they are very intentional about making sure that whatever they put out there can appeal to a wide age range and can plant seeds of fandom across generations. Disney's known for appealing to children, and then as they grow up, they kind of become the adult audience that people the adult audience that we're able to cater to, whereas NBC was not really focused on that, but that was Disney's specialty. So as storytelling presentation, I think the approach of the acquiring companies made a huge difference.
Well,
and to your point, I think that you're right, and I think Star Wars is actually perfect. I never thought about this until you just said it. Star Wars is actually perfect for Disney because they are known for fantasy. I mean, they started with Mickey Mouse, and then there was Bambi and Fantasia. They've been fantasy all along. Science fantasy is in their wheelhouse. Science fiction is a little different. I think they're branching out into some of the things that they're bringing in from Hulu and National Geographics and those kinds of things. But their wheelhouse is really fantasy.
Well, and to RJ's point, when Disney purchased both the Marvel and what do we think? Star Wars IP. One of the big things that kept going around is that Disney wanted something that, from their perspective, and like I said, because we know plenty of women who love both Marvel comics and Star Wars, but from this limited corporate perspective, they were like, we need things for boys because they had the Disney princess stuff on lock. So it's that thing of now we have this IP, which is more action oriented, which is more adventure, which is, more kind of bam, boom, whiz, pop, every comic book sound effects that I hate using when writing the script, that type of thing. So it's very, it's like you said, it's very corporate. It's very, there's a thing of marketing. Like I remember when those new Star Trek movies came out, the Abrams verse, where this the lens flare, and everybody was just like, oh my God, it's too much action in space. And I
was there really?
Well, so the point
wasn't enough.
The point that I'm making with that is that I know people who watch those movies who didn't watch any of the Star Trek series. And they were like, yo, I love these movies, right? And that's the thing. So it's the thing of you do different stuff, to try to grow the audience. So maybe you can get them now to watch the TV shows. I know one of the biggest criticisms of the Star Trek, the new Alex Kurtzman verse is that, I think is it Kurtzman, or I always mispronounce his name, is that there's too much action in that, but that balance with some like forward thinking, moral, storytelling grows your audience. So it's that thing of like trying to find a balance. And the same thing with Star Wars. Like we talk about, like, there's a bunch of action and, space fantasy and lightsaber fights and, dog fights in space. But then you watch something like Andor, my God, that is the closest thing storytelling wise in science fiction, and there are other examples, but Star Wars wise, that reflects the world in which we're living right now, living underneath a totalitarian regime, and what happens when you speak up against that, you get massacred. So it's this thing of like, I think that
wait a minute, Star Wars isn't political.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing, like, but most people associate Star Wars with being more action oriented, but then you get examples throughout the franchise of where they have touched on what we are dealing with in our world. So I think that definitely, though I said Star Wars is rock and roll, there's a lot that you can learn from that or take from that applies to, the things that we're dealing with nowadays. And that's just science fiction in general. That's good science fiction, so.
Yeah,
no, go ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I
I was just thinking that I would almost put Star Wars almost more in the same lane as Lord of the Rings series than with science fiction. There are the religious connotations. The political stuff is more similar to the oppression meted out by the Roman Empire than what's relevant now. Yes, the Roman Empire is being reflected in what we're seeing now, but I think at its core and at its roots, I think Star Wars is more reflective of that kind of vibe where you have those kingdoms and conquest and that kind of thing. Whereas Star Trek the politic is more 20th century in its flavor.
I wanted to point out something that Robert brought up. A couple of things, actually. The J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. I want to talk about that for a quick second because even for me, even though I was aware of all of the series that came out prior to the Abrams verse, I wasn't a fan of the original runs of Star Trek, being the original series, Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. Up until that point, I grew up with them, but they were boring to me. The J.J. Abrams verse took that being in space and it being Star Trek to a whole nother level. Yes, the lens flares, but I love that. I didn't know that would be a thing once I became an actual Star Trek fan, but the J.J. Abrams movies is what got me to go back and rewatch a lot of the original Star Trek that came out. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. I had nothing but time. So I started watching Voyager. And I was like, wait a minute, this is awesome. Why was I ever so hypercritical of this as a kid? And I had to sit back and think, again, like we're talking about, Star Wars is flashy, so it's easier to get into that. But if you really like jazz, I got a couple of Star Trek Voyager episodes for you that you should definitely watch. Just because of the acting, the storytelling, the nuance of what they're talking about, it hit so much differently as an adult once I was able to really understand what the stories they're trying to tell versus where's the next lightsaber battle going to happen, because that looks awesome.
Quick question. I want to make sure that I probably misunderstood you. Okay. You were definitely not bored with the Dominion War storyline in Deep Space Nine, correct?
So I haven't actually gotten to that part of DS9 yet. I'm on DS9 now, so
I mean,
give me a minute.
So to your point, I think that there needs to be a discussion about the medium also. So like for Trek first and foremost has always been a television show. Like we've gotten really good movies. I mean, like what 11 to 12. I mean, and maybe more that, and I'm getting the number wrong, but I think part of the reason, in addition to the moral and social issues that Trek has always focused on, is that they had 20 plus episodes to focus on those issues. So when you look at the original trilogy of Star Wars, but then also let's say the Phantom Menace trilogy, the Attack of the Clones or whatever, I'm just like the best way to they trying to put butts in seats, right? So when you see the Phantom Menace, they're talking about trade negotiations and they're talking about tariffs and taxes and we're like, yo, where's Darth Maul with the double-sided lightsaber? So, but when you sit down and watch Trek, you are looking for, at least I feel, this is my opinion, and I'm not saying that everybody believes this, you're looking for your space adventure, but you're also looking at how do we intelligently tackle the issues that of our time in the far-flung future. So I think that when you have 20 plus episodes to do that, it makes it, I think, easier, or it's a bit better. And I always think that television plays best to for Trek to tell those types of stories. So when they were telling those Abrams verse stories, there is less of that social and moral issues that you get in those three movies. I will admit that. But I also know that those three movies were made to do what? Put butts in seats and do what they did for you to get people to go back and rewatch Trek to see where they came from. So you can get to the action of the Dominion War, but then mixed in with that, you get issues of PTSD. You get issues of, once again, a tyrannical regime trying to take over, the universe. But, so you're learning while you're also getting the action. But those were, and I know a lot of Trek fans hate those movies, but I acknowledge what they were for. They were to get people that I know who hate Trek, who don't like Trek, to go, as a way for them to get into Trek, and also to give that series a pump, like a kind of a shot in the arm that it hadn't had since Enterprise. This is like a rant that I will always go on because I always hear people dog those movies, but I'm just like, as a money-making machine, that's what they did. So, I mean, like I said, Mark, you're an example of that. So,
yeah, no, I agree.
What they did the con.
Huh?
But what the Abram universe did.
No, okay, so Tony, I'm not sitting here and saying that those movies are perfect, but like I said, I will not defend the issues that they did with whitewashing Khan, and also some other storytelling issues. I'm still a writer first and foremost, but from a business perspective, those movies made bank and they got people back into the franchise.
I always kept talking about how they kept sticking motorcycles in there wherever they could.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's kind of where we were at. And then you saw some of that same vibe reflected in the current era of Trek. But they balanced that out with the more inclusion, with LGBTQ plus, with the everything that Trek deals with, but you have a lot of action. So I don't know. It's just it's a weird time to be a Trek fan, especially if you want to see it grow, and you don't hate everything about it. So I mean, that's actually what I give Star Wars more than Trek. They found a way to kind of hold on to the fandom even when it's at its most toxic. Like I said, I keep coming back to Andor. That Star Wars growing up.
So one of the things is thinking about the roots of each of those. You got to remember that Star Trek was 12 years before the first Star Wars movie. I mean, we're talking about 1965 as opposed to 1977. And there's a lot that occurred in that time. Right after Star Trek was canceled, we landed on the moon.
Right.
I mean, literally a matter of months. I mean, just a couple months, 1 or 2 months. I mean, I think it ended in May and we landed on the moon in June or July. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, Star Trek, the special effects were kind of cheesy to anybody who was raised in the 80s or 90s or in the 21st century. But the original, if you see the uncut episodes of Star Trek, the original series, there was a lot of cerebral stuff in there that got cut out in the rebroadcast that took place in the 80s and the 90s and now. There's a lot of internal dialogue, particularly from Spock, about thinking and pondering about some of the things that he sees and decisions that are made and the right and the wrong. There are things that you don't see in the rebroadcast on network television, but if you go to Paramount and you look at it there, you see the whole thing. And you see, wow, I never saw that. I never heard that conversation. I never heard that monologue. So there's some really interesting things that they couldn't really explore with special effects. But the human side of Star Trek: The Original Series was spectacular, and they try to rekindle that, I think, with the Abrams series. And Next Generation, I thought was again spectacular, but for different reasons. Right. Jean-Luc Picard was a very different person from Kirk. And Data, if you think of Data as the counterpart to Spock, he was very different also. Spock had wisdom and age. Data has innocence to him. and just trying to figure out who he is. Whereas Spock, had thousands of years of Vulcan history behind it.
These are all great points. But Robert, you mentioned something that I definitely want to talk about before we move on to the next talking point. Wokeness in sci-fi. There is a big outrage or outcry of, especially with, like you mentioned, Starfleet Academy. It just started season 1, and halfway through season 1, they are canceled because it's deemed too woke, and fans are complaining, this isn't my Star Wars, or this isn't my Star Trek, this isn't what I grew up watching. And I literally sit back and think, did you watch the same episodes that I did? Did you watch the history that was of Uhura kissing Kirk on camera in the 1960s? That was very woke. Like, I don't understand.
Forced kiss doesn't count.
Right. I don't understand how people come up with this mindset that the things that we all grew up watching all of a sudden has too much DEI and wokeness in it, when these things were DEI and woke from the very beginning. You just wasn't paying attention. People have said that about Power Rangers, about X-Men, that it's too woke, it's too DEI, it's too diverse. But it has always been that from the beginning.
And if you didn't catch it, it's over your head.
I feel like people are sensitive to it right now because that phrase wokeness is being weaponized and has been co-opted. As you said, it was there before. If anything, they're just louder. And of course, people have a problem with it. They had a problem with it back then, but they presented it in a way that I think it was layered. And so in a way, you kind of got distracted by other things, but it was still there. And so I think it's just a matter of people now, because of our current situation, wanting or feeling empowered to complain vocal even more. And it's not, they couldn't have been vocal back then, but I think now it's just, there's a precedent that's been set. And so people are jumping in to try and dismantle anything they can that they don't like.
Well, there's certain
episodes of Star Trek that were not aired in the South.
Yeah.
Yes.
I hate with a burning passion how that word has been stolen.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say.
So one of the things that we have nowadays, it's a couple of things. We have this thing called the internet, right? And we have the communities, toxic parts of these communities who can now learn about these words and how the people that they follow weaponize it. Woke, DEI, diversity, inclusion, whatever hashtags, and they search for these. They search for these hashtags. So when it comes to Trek specifically and Star Wars, but more so Trek, because Trek has always been woke. Trek has always been the series that you look at to learn about how can we stop messing up, right? And have a better, more inclusive future. I've been disgusted with the fandom and how they've reacted to the inclusion that has started during the Kurtzman era. Going back to Burnham, when they saw that sister on the bridge,
they had a fit.
They had fits. Going to now with Starfleet Academy, where you have a more diverse and inclusive group of young people, and going, and that's the thing that also irritates them, is that it's young people, but it's just like, okay, so we're looking at 40-year-olds going into the Starfleet Academy, right? It would have always have been 18 to 25 because we're dealing with them when they're
who gets
college.
recruited into the
but we don't have a lot of common sense nowadays. The thing that you can tell that my tolerance for toxic fandom has gotten me to the point where I don't want to deal with these motherfuckers. And excuse my language, sorry, but Trek specifically, this is like some highfalutin stuff for me to say. We're supposed to be better than that when it comes when it comes to fandom. So the fact that you have people and not even constructively being critical of the storytelling, of the directing, of this, of that I can respect, right? But what I don't respect is when you say, we got a black woman who's a captain, we showing too much. We showing too many gay people. We showing people who are like overweight. We're showing LGBTQ issues or representation because, you know, Lord forbid, in the 23rd or 24th century, we got people of the same sex who love each other or who identify as different identities. So my thing is, Trek has not always gotten it right. I will admit that, definitely, but the toxicity that has taken place in the fandom that I love more than X-Men, more than comic books, has hurt for a while. And I don't know necessarily that it gets better, because that's where we're at now when it comes to fandom in general. And it doesn't matter what fandom you follow. When it comes to geek stuff, you will have these pockets which try to tear down the things that you love without looking at it as something that everybody loves. But especially for Trek, I don't know if they've been watching the same show that I've been watching since The Next Generation, which is unfortunate.
I think some people watch these things with blinders on. So, I mean, the people that we are talking about are the people who love fire phasers or phasers on stun or phasers set to kill, photon torpedoes. This is what they like. And everything else, all the dialogue just kind of gets filtered out. And for people like that, you know, if you're alien, whether you're Klingon or you're Romulan, blast them. Okay. That's what they hear, you know. And you know, they hear the respect of one warrior to another when you've slain the Romulan ship that's been destroyed. You know, that's what they hear, but they don't hear, you know, the moral dilemmas that you know, the characters have to deal with, and that's woke. And again, from an old guy, it's wake the up. Okay, you know, open your damn eyes and see what's going on around you. Why are you voting against your self-interest? You know, why this is something that, you know, you can lead a lot of people into, and this is what we're seeing. And now all those people who are anti-woke are waking up. They're opening their eyes and they're seeing what's going on. Hopefully in time, maybe not. But you know, this is something that we've talked about for a long, long time, though. You know, there are things that are going on, and you close your eyes to them because it's comfortable for you. You know, when things work out well for you, and you know it's an uneven playing field, yeah, you know, you don't want to open your eyes. You're in dreamland. But you know, when things start to change, you know, you got to open your eyes eventually. You got to wake up. You can't stay asleep forever.
Well, when I was watching Star Trek growing up, I didn't watch Star Trek to learn anything. I was actually into it for its space, its aliens, its lasers. That's why I was watching it.
Yeah,
all right. But the storytelling still taught me and exposed me and made me think about different things.
Right.
Okay.
And you don't always get those things at the same time. Sometimes you see it once and you like it, you love the way it's executed, you watch it again, and then you get story, you get character, you start to learn who Kirk is, you start to learn who Bones is, you start to learn, you know, who Scotty is. You learn these things, you know, as you watch the show.
Right. And like I said, it actually had time and stuff with all of the episodes that they had per season for us to get to know the different people and the crewmen and get to learn what was different about them. Like I said, that's one problem I did have with Discovery, is that I watched Discovery, and even through all those seasons, I hardly learned anything about half the people that were on the crew, on the bridge.
Right.
You know, they kept focusing on the same characters. And I'm like, well, what about these other characters? There's actually, I know I watched every single episode of Discovery. I can't even tell you the name of the brother who disappeared in the final 2 seasons that was on the bridge because they never did anything with him. What was his name?
But that's
two-dimensional characters. He might as well have been wearing a red shirt.
Well, I mean, but that's more of a constructively critical, like that's a criticism, right? But we know, with being in these fandom circles that we are in, when it comes to Facebook specifically, let's say that's not what it's always limited to. You know, like when they decided to put the brother in a skirt, you know, for being a Cleon, everybody lost their minds. Like everybody lost their minds, and it was just this thing of let him be, just let him do his thing. And you know, there was, like I said, there was a heavy. I'm a big dude, so there was a heavy set person who was on the bridge of the Athena, and people were losing their minds. Politicians were losing their minds about that when it came to Trek, when they were trying to show representation. So it's just, I just think in general, and I don't try to be a pessimist. That's a new word, y'all. Pessimic. I try not to be a pessimist, but the state of fandom is in a bad place. It just is, and and like I said, it's across the board. And I think that I don't personally even know where Trek is going to go from now because of who actually owns the rights to it when it comes to Paramount, because it's run by, you know, one person who leans towards the, you know, towards the evil regime. So my heart hurts for Trek right now. You know, like I said, Starfleet Academy, which was going to be the future. You know, I think of Trek. You know, it's only getting 2 seasons. You know, and then Strange New Worlds is getting like 2 additional seasons, but it's been like truncated. So I don't know. I worry because we need that inclusive sci-fi, and there are other examples out there, you know, and it's not just Trek, but I do think that we need more science fiction and genre storytelling that gives us an escape, but also continues to teach us about how we're going to work this stuff out, you know. So that's what I try. Like I said, that's what I try to do with the writing. That's what I try to do with the storytelling. But also as a fan, I would love to just continue to kind of partake in stuff like that.
I'll tell you one thing.
Taught us how to work stuff out. People just ignoring it.
I was going to say the whole point of sci-fi. I'll never forget, like in film school, and this was, I think, learning about sci-fi in film school made me appreciate it even more. Sci-fi's whole point has always been to reflect the anxieties of mankind: man versus tech, man versus nature, man versus man. And as was pointed out, people are just choosing to ignore it. And unfortunately, I do also say that white supremacy, because when we talk about the toxicity in fandoms, some of the things I'm hearing right now, I've heard about like comments that are made as it relates to cosplay. We've had that conversation before, all kinds of things. So ironically, people are taking the best bits and actually leaving behind the lessons and the people. It's almost like sitting a kid down in class and they're not actually learning the lesson they're supposed to, even though like they're intentionally ignoring what they're supposed to be absorbing. But yeah.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, it's, you know, like when you said sci-fi and even horror, you know, that's a whole other discussion, but just is being a reflection of the time. I think about something like The Purge, like the, you know, how you get that reflecting the politics of the time, the anxieties of America, of how we had gotten to a point where, I mean, there's an episode of Trek where, in Strange New Worlds, first episode of the first season, where they reference the January 6th insurrection, you know, as a story point to teach an alien civilization of like, this is where we were. We trying to make y'all not get there. You know, so like, yo, let's park the Enterprise in the skies and just like teach y'all something. So like, I think that, like you said, art does that. It gives us that escape, but it also is a way for people to learn, but we ain't learning, at least like a lot of us, you know, and it's sad, you know, I don't know. So
I used to watch the sci-fi shows and movies from like the 70s and 80s and 90s, and they was scared of bejeebies out of me watching stuff like, you know, Soylent Green. Okay, I mean, there even Blade Runner. Okay, you know, all of these movies, we've gone past those time periods now, and I'm like, whoo, you know, what they predicted did not come to pass.
Well, I mean,
you know, but it could have. I mean, you know, we're on a razor's edge. You know, one of the things we really are. But one of the things that I think that Star Trek might have embraced, and it would have taken them in a different direction and expanded their base, is Prelude to Axanar. That whole it was a fanfic spinoff, but I thought it was really excellent. If you haven't seen it, Prelude to Axanar, you can see it on YouTube, and it's by Tony. What's the guy's name again? He attended one of your Sci-Fi expos a few years ago.
And if you hadn't asked me, I could have told you. As soon as you get ready to ask me his name, it went out of my head.
Yep. But if you look it up, he did a spectacular job. It was short, it was to the point. It got pretty decent special effects, but the vibe was very different from Star Trek. Even though they included a lot of Star Trek characters and some real stars, real movie stars were in it.
There are things, though, when going back to like an earlier point, that science fiction has predicted. And unfortunately, like, we are there. One of the episodes that I think about, I keep coming back to Deep Space Nine, the OG, was I don't remember the title of it, but it's a 2-part episode where they go to the Bell riots, right? And basically, this is a 2-parter that predicted the tent cities, that predicted, not predicted, but basically showed like how we could get to the 10 cities, or how we could get to like massive unemployment to the point where people who can't find jobs, or basically where the top 1% are living in high-rise apartments looking down on
the cloud minders.
Yeah, it's I can't the episodes the episode title I can't remember, but it's like Deep Space Nine season 2 or 3.
Oh, Deep Space Nine.
So like all the stuff that you see in places like downtown Atlanta. One of the biggest examples for like is think about LA, Skid Row, the unhoused. That when you look at those 2 episodes, that is exactly where we are right now, and we still haven't learned. So I think that there is nothing wrong with escaping, right? But I think the other thing that I want people to take from this discussion, specifically when it comes to science fiction, is there ain't nothing wrong with learning, y'all. And having that mixed in, whether you're reading a book, a sci-fi book, a sci-fi comic book, a movie, or a TV show, just balance the two, because otherwise we are doomed to keep staying in this cyclical cycle that we've been living in since, man hit the other man over the top of the head with a rock, or something. So
forget sci-fi history. Read history.
Well, I mean, and we have countless examples, I think, of space opera sci-fi specifically, like The Expanse. The Expanse is an amazing series but it is like Trek in that it teaches, but then also you have the, kind of the political action mixed in with that. And there are a lot of examples of really good sci-fi that you can watch now, which does what Trek has done and what Star Wars does in space. But learn and have fun at the same time. So
I want to just point out this comment that just came up. Sci-fi has always been a glimpse of whatever our current situation was. I in a lot of sci-fi that I watched, like that Bill Wright's episode that you mentioned from DS9, there's an episode of Voyager where I think Chakotay is in like a hospital prison system, and he realizes that the people at the top are the ones who are getting all the benefit, and people at the bottom are just there to feed the machine of the wealthy people. There's so many examples of stories like that within all of sci-fi. I personally feel like, and I felt like this for like 10 years, maybe longer, we are currently living in the dark timeline with how things are currently working out. We are on the cusp of all of those things happening, like the Bell riots, like you mentioned, right now as we speak. And it's so painful to watch how the things that I am enjoying in media to escape from my current reality reflect my current reality so much. I want to give you an example. The episode of The Boys that just came out, not this week's, last week's episode, the week before, where Homelander wanted to be Jesus or a god or whatever. Like, why did Trump 2 days before that basically do that and ruin the plot of The Boys for The Boys. It was like we were planning to do this because we was like, this is the most unrealistic thing that could possibly happen, so we're going to put it in our show. And then it happened 2 days before it went to air, and now the creators are like, we thought we came up with something that was so outlandish it could never happen, and then it happened. And it just reminded me of the whole hamburgers thing from SNL from 2016. Like, the current situation, it's so dire that creatives cannot outcreate it. That's
well, you know,
in
my office,
nobody would
I
believe
wear
it.
a white robe and I wear a sash around, and I do have a halo around my head when I go from room to room seeing patients.
Thank you, but that's right. RJ, you wanted to say something.
I mean, honestly, I feel like even just looking at like AI, it was so funny to me, like looking at things like iRobot or even The Matrix, and how the robots got to a point where they kind of started to overpower the people, and how our society is like at this point where like we're relying on AI. Increasingly, we're seeing how good it is, but then we're also seeing the negatives of it. We're seeing how this can turn around and bite us in the butt. We're seeing the negative aspects of it in terms of the resources that are being used up to utilize it. And while there are some benefits and some good uses in general, going back to that idea that like we're not really learning our lesson, and that AI is like, have you heard of those like what was it? I think I saw on a forum that like they kind of let AI kind of like not operate by itself, but almost like give its opinion of humans. And there just have been several instances where the things it said have been eerily dark, and it's just like, oh yeah, we are not far from Terminator. All we need is for AI to get an actual robotic body, and they already had certain robotic things delivering mail. China's already doing that.
Yeah, China has
Terminator and The Matrix.
Yes, that is a major one. Like, I remember when I first watched The Matrix, when it like hit me that they were living in like a very advanced sewer system, and I was like, oh, so the robots chase them underground? That's horrible. We got to make sure we never let that happen.
Genie's already out of the bottle.
We're about to become living batteries, y'all.
It's so funny that we bring up The Matrix at this point, because earlier or last night while I was at work, I started researching a bunch of the backstory behind of how did that civilization get to the point where they became batteries. And their breaking point was when the UN, the United Nations, decided to black out the sky with nanobots, thinking that will kill off the robots because the sun is their power source, and not forgetting that, hey, we also need the sun too, because we eat things that grow with sunlight. And you know, humanity and the stability of the environment needs it. And then they released the nanobots in the air, and then that, like, yeah, it helped, but like it also just doomed them.
Yeah, that's an example of bad writing.
Right. I agree. But to the point, I feel like as a society where we are in the year of our Lord 2026, we are almost there. If not, we've probably reached that limit. And
you know, I wouldn't call that bad writing though, because you know that's the very definition of a doomsday device. When you know you're losing, you know, the man who has nothing to lose is a very dangerous person.
Yeah.
If human beings are backed into a corner and AI is taking over everything,
that's a very
basically you figure we're dead already. The only thing we can do is a doomsday device so that we can negotiate, and then they actually used it. You know, that is not that's not an unbelievable trope.
They bit off their nails to spite their face.
Right, exactly.
So that brings me to this question I would like to ask the four of you, since the four of you are all heavily into the sci-fi space. What are some of your favorite and least favorite sci-fi tropes that you have adapted into your own work?
Oh man.
Ooh, okay. So my Iflu series, my Iflu Legacy, reflects, it's like a dark mirror reflection of our society. Some of the things that we're heading for, I have a society that faced those things, passed those, they got through those things, and then they got so arrogant that they thought themselves gods, and they thought they could get away with anything, and they still are subject to the unexpected. with all their knowledge, all their scientific sophistication, the fact that they've already begun to colonize, the planets in this solar system, they still, didn't realize how vulnerable they were until it hit them. And that's a little bit of I try not to be too heavy-handed with it, but it's a lesson to all of us. Even people who are 500, 1,000 years ahead of where we are now are still vulnerable to blunders and natural occurrences. Exodus Heresy, if anybody's interested.
That is very interesting, actually, and I'm going to get to your novel eventually. I'm still reading Space Funk, which I'm going to come back to that in a second too. But I am very interested. But what about you, Tony? You've created a couple of comics. What are some of your favorite and least favorite tropes to incorporate into your work?
Well, funnily enough, the trope we were just basically talking about: don't trust the AI, don't trust the terminus. It's like, their best interest, they're going to do what's in their best interest.
Okay, fair enough. RJ?
Oh gosh. I mean, there's a few. One of them being the idea that technology was seen for how it could benefit and how it could help, but in the hands of someone who prized power more than humanity, someone who prized and this is a big theme in the series is how people wield power and the person behind it. The right tech in the wrong person's hand becomes everyone's detriment, when in another person's hand it could have almost been like a salvation to people. And that's something that I explore. And then also something I'm very inspired by. Like I love what's his name? Urisawa, the writer behind Pluto, and kind of humanizing life forms, right? When they're built on an AI system, but they're built so much like humans that you can't tell the difference. From a morality-based perspective, do you treat them worse than, less than, or do you acknowledge that humanity? And then how does that fit into the world? And how human are they, in the sense of are they better? Are they more perfect? Or are they just like humans in all the worst ways? Well, those are things I kind of like to touch on in my series.
That was a lot of the theme of Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, with the Cylons. How close were they to humans? That was a really great series. That was, it was a huge splash, but not followed up on. But that was a brilliant series, in my opinion.
I still love the original. I remember, cheating past my bedtime to watch the original Battlestar Galactica when it came on. It was only one season, but it was still like almost 30 episodes, so it felt like a lot more.
So I guess to answer the question, I don't know if it's so much a trope, but I'll just say good trope. Intelligence can save the day, right? I think a lot of people devalue intelligence, especially nowadays. But one of the things I try to bring forward in my work, and like I said, I don't know if it's a trope, but just like, smart saves lives. So that's one thing. And I think I consider it a bad trope, is that the bad trope of the white male savior. Real. Like in most of everything that I write, it's a group of people of color, brother or sister at the forefront, trying to solve the problem that, we are dealing with in the story. Like I said, I can write anybody, anyone, that you can put in front of me, as long as I do my homework. But I find that when it comes to specifically speculative fiction, at least when I was growing up, like I love Back to the Future, but the only brothers that I saw in that were, I'm going to be mayor. That one, that guy, and that was it. That's all I could think of. That and the black family that shot at Michael J. Fox when he was sleeping on their porch in the second movie, which is appropriate. Like if you just see some random person sleeping on your porch or actually climb into the room of your daughter, you better pull out a gun or something.
Right.
So anyway, but that was the type of representation that I was seeing where we were just always like the side characters. We were always the support. We were always the one that said, he went in that direction. I can help you fight them. I wanted to be the one to, step up and, have characters that look like my mom, my dad, people I grew up with on the south side of Chicago, not just being the support. So that is a bad trope that I try to push away, just the idea of the white male savior or just the white savior.
I address that in my writing as well. In my science fiction, everybody kind of looks like, people on the screen here. And it's not, it's not in an exclusive way. It's like, what if everybody just happened to be, look like this? But the other thing that I put in the book, and I point out, intelligence is another weapon. It's like claws, it's like fangs, it's like wings, it's like keen eyesight. Intelligence is a weapon, and it's interesting that we, as the dominant species on Earth, have sort of cornered the market on that particular weapon. And there are other intelligent beings. There are whales and dolphins and other primates, but they haven't honed it into the weapon that we have. Mm-hmm. And there's a danger in honing that weapon. Do we have the wisdom? We call ourselves Homo sapiens, the wise men. But do we really have the wisdom to do that? And what I did was I created a culture where they're not only intelligent, but they're enlightened. And the enlightenment is, we're all in this together, and we can have rivalries, but we need to work together. And there's a tense harmony between them that breaks down when a truth comes through that they can't escape, they can't control, and they can't predict.
That's fascinating. I'm actually happy that Robert and Dr. Glenn, you brought up the aspect of representation in space, which leads me to my final question of the evening for everyone, if you want to answer it or not. There seems to be a lack, even in modern science fiction, there still seems to be a lack, or maybe violent, angry feedback to when there are a certain number of Black people in space. And I would like to ask, why is that? Can Black people not be in space? Can we not be captains of Star Trek bridges? Can we not be gay Klingons? It seems like in the science fiction world, you can only have but so many people of color and marginalized characters, like the white savior trope you mentioned. Everybody in Star Trek back in the day, in the original series, most of them were white characters, minus Uhura. Yeah, you had a Russian, you had this and that. But when it comes to characters of color, when we have more than a certain amount, when stories skew to more of the minority characters, fandom seems to get upset with that. Given the times that we live in, I understand. But do any of you have any thoughts behind why Black people are limited when it comes to being in space?
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, RJ. Sorry.
White supremacy.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. To Star Trek, the original series credit, Uhura was the one that you saw most, but there was Dr. Mabenga. Mm-hmm. There were Black admirals in Starfleet. There were Black scientists what was the episode with the supercomputer? And he made it, basically it was a reflection of his own mind that he designed the computer to. I forget the guy's name, but you saw Black guest stars who really had some. They had layers to them. They weren't just a token Black face on there. They had authority, or they had agency in the episodes.
Well, there's one of the white supremacy is the best answer. That's I love that. The other thing, and going to that point, is that when I was watching The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine, in Deep Space Nine we had Benjamin Sisko, at the forefront. But like I'm always looking in the background, right? I'm looking to see who's just walking around in the back, who is a background player, and that's where I would see a lot of representation of people who just weren't white when it came to Trek. Like, and if they weren't, even if they didn't have speaking roles, I was like, oh man, there are Black people there. I'm doing a rewatch of Stargate Atlantis, and I see a lot of representation behind the scenes. The point that I make though is that I wish that some of the speaking roles for the scientists were for Black folks or for people of color, so that like we got a lot of soldiers in there, which is great. We got a lot of Black Marines, but when it comes to the scientific roles, it's just like, okay, I need some brothers and some sisters. The other point I was going to make is that on the independent scene, we are we are at the front. we are.
I got you.
The example that I give is Milton Davis, the Dark Universe series, Dark Universe, and then Dark Universe, Bright Empire. That is a two anthology book, a 2-book series of short stories where it's focused on Black folks who go to the stars and create their own intergalactic empire. One thing I'm tooting my own horn here. I have a short story in the second book, but I think independently you are seeing that representation for us not just being pushed to the side or to the background. When it comes to going to the point of white supremacy, I think with these larger companies, it's always going to come back to this thing of like, is it going to sell? Is it going to quote my friend Tanya, is it going to sell to Timmy's mother in Midwest America? That's who they are looking at. And if it doesn't have that crossover appeal for them, that's when the white supremacy comes in. But if it sells to them, then they'll be like, okay, let's put as many Black people at the forefront as we want, right? But independently, if people just do searches for Black science fiction or Black space operas, it's all out there. Everybody on this panel, we got stuff that y'all can come and buy. You don't have to look at Paramount for having just an all-Black cast, right? You don't have to look at Disney. You don't have to look at the larger companies. We got it. But sometimes the nerds don't listen. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But
I also, I think something comes to mind that I heard someone else talk about, and I thought it was a very interesting take. This woman was talking about the redhead trope that we see in film. And what does this have to do with sci-fi, for example, where you see less at the forefront? This woman was talking about how a lot of the big wigs in some of these companies, the storytellers, however it trickled down, they wanted to find a way to present a character who was just unique enough, but still comfortably white. And this was interesting because they brought up the point, like when you think of like what was on Boomerang and some of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, right? How there was always like that redhead. Now I was when I first heard this, like thinking about like the video game space and how the Frutiger Arrow aesthetic was actually technically easier to produce, the sunlight, the waves, the green, the blues, and so that's why they went to it. And her argument was that they were essentially trying to scratch a very specific issue. When you think about some of these sci-fi series, they present, like you said, the Russian, they present the different quirky presentations of whiteness, but presenting that Blackness was a little bit too risky. And if they were going to do it, it had to be done a certain way, and they had to be a certain distance in the back, and maybe they had to even be a certain shade. And if they were going to be any darker, then they had to be an alien, either to make everyone comfortable or, for whatever reason. I see Mark's look. And so I feel like in an interesting way, that is another contributing factor to why you didn't see Black people, because aside from the obvious white supremacy, there was that nuance of, we can push this boundary a little bit, but we only want to push it a certain way, and the redhead was the safest way. Ironically, I don't recall there being any redheads in Star Wars or Star Trek, but the concept remains the same, right?
Yeah.
There's a saying in the South about the redheaded stepchild. And white folks often talk about them, being, questionable parentage kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
But yes, there is a redheaded character in Star Trek. Her name is Tilly. She's in Star Trek Discovery. She's one of my favorite characters from that whole series. So I definitely recommend you give her a look up. She also cameos in Starfleet Academy. Love her to death. But
In turn, it says Crusher is redhead.
Right. Yes, that's right. Dr. Parris.
That's right. Wesley Crusher.
Redhead.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Flaming redhead.
That's right.
Yes.
I forgot about that.
I don't know if that's a tip of the hat to Lucille Ball, who started it all, who was a redhead.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's true. But RJ, you bring up something. You bring up a couple of things that actually are things I'm starting to not really like when I see them in sci-fi, especially when it comes to Black people. You're absolutely right. The darker you are, the more alien they make you in these things. And I'm starting to hate seeing Black people cast in things, but they're just 100% alien. Like green is the new black in Hollywood, if that makes sense. Like look at what is that? Elsbeth, the Wicked movie.
Wicked Witch, yeah.
Right. Yeah, she's Black, and then Gamora from Guardians of the Galaxy, she's green, she's Black. A lot of the gay Klingon, I can't remember his name, but like the fact that Klingons were supposed to be Black people from the original series, they've always made it seem like Klingons were just Black people.
They were in black in the original series. They were in blackface.
Right, that too, that part. Yes, given that. But yeah, I just it irritates me that a Black person just can't be Black when it comes to being in sci-fi. My favorite science fiction IP of all time is Power Rangers, and finally, in the last 2 seasons, they had 2 Rangers be Black people, but they were aliens, and it always just irritated me. Why can't they just be Black?
Well, first of all, let's not even. That's a whole nother show.
It is.
I've been watching a whole bunch of Crunchyroll, and the way Asian media treats Blacks, I have issues with.
I mean, that's a whole episode in and of itself.
Right, and the thing about it is and stuff is like I said, I was going to stuff like Dragon Con and Fantasy Fair when there were like 5 Black people there, maybe 10 if you were lucky. Okay, now I go to these shows and there's many thousands of them. But the one thing that most of them seem to have in common is their love of anime. All right, but anime doesn't necessarily love them.
I've been saying that this whole time. Japan, wonderful place. Treat Black people like crap. And I never understood why we as Black people gravitated towards their culture, knowing that they treat us all some kind of ways. Like, oh my God.
Because those cartoons are cool.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah.
But we have the ability to create. In my world, in the Iflu legacy, they're all Black, but they all have different agendas. And if you want to see racism, if you want to see backstabbing, if you want to see elitism, if you want to see privilege, you look at the Iflu. And they're all Black, but there's some people that I just can't stand. I mean, I created them and I can't stand them.
Okay, Spike Lee.
Yeah, well, but the point that I'm making is it's a dark mirror, and I mean that on many levels. You can have these kinds of things, and if you look at these people and you see that they've got incredible tolerance, they've got 400 different species, and they figured out how to work together for the most part. That it breaks down when there's a crisis, but we got one species. We're really one color with different shades, and we can't get along. And it makes me think if the entire world, 7 billion people were all blonde with blue eyes, there'd still be war, because some of them would have blonde hair that's a little too curly. They'd have eyes the wrong shade of blue. They'd have a cleft in their chin or not cleft in the chin. They would find some way to divide and have conflict.
I think a lot of cartoons like Rick and Morty and Futurama kind of pick at that very trope. I think there's an episode of Rick and Morty where a whole planet of aliens are at war with each other because some of them have innies and other ones have outies. I think belly buttons or something. Even in Star Trek, isn't there a species of aliens where they're half black, half white,
Right,
and
right.
they like
And
eat
they're
each
black
other?
on the yeah.
Right. So I think that trope, that's hilarious.
That was,
to me.
you know, what was interesting about that?
Go
In the
for it.
1960s, the people in power were black on the right side, and the others were black on the left side. But you were black on the right side. That says a lot.
White is right.
Yeah, no. But you were black on the right side,
Mm-hmm.
and you were on top. That was interesting. That was an interesting choice.
That was
Well,
a
I
very
still want them to
interesting
figure out in the future how these people exist in, Starfleet Academy, because supposedly those two guys were the last ones and they were trying to kill each other. So
we
I
don't
hope
know
they
how their
do that in the second
species.
season, since we're not going to get a third season.
They might explain it that they just asexually reproduce or something. I don't know. It was weird. I saw that. I know exactly what you're talking about, but
Oh, come on. You know that there had to be some colony, some isolated colony somewhere where they were stranded. I can write that.
But we are actually over time. It was only meant this show to be an hour, but let's go ahead and start winding down. Why don't you all tell everybody where they can find you at on the internet and where they can purchase some of your books at? Tony, go first.
Oh, okay. Tony Cade, Challenges Games and Comics. It's right there in front of me. Challengesgames.com. You can order online. You can come by the store. The main thing I want to tell people, with all this stuff we've been talking about sci-fi and history, make sure you get out there and vote on May 16th.
Perfect.
You've got power. Use it before they take it away.
They have already started doing that, and you know they have. But Dr. Glenn Parris, your turn.
Okay. So my website is very easy to find. It is www.glennparris.com. Glenn with 2 N's, Parris with 2 R's, because as I always say, I am double trouble.
Okay. RJ.
Yes. So you guys can follow me on Instagram, which is at @the_7th. That's the number 7th_kingdom. Or if you want to access our link hub that has our website, has paperback copies, also has our Ko-fi to finance our trip to Anime NYC and DreamCon, you can go to hop, that's hopp.bio/7thkingdom. And just enjoy the ride of the fandom and the growth of the series.
Awesome. Robert.
Can I, if I could say one real quick thing, Tony, I can't believe you let it go past there. So I'm doing a world building and character building workshop on May 16th at Challenges Games and Comics, and there'll be a fee for it, but there'll be lunch and there'll be AI animation, music, book trailers, as well as a couple of other guest speakers. But it's an interactive, intimate world building and character development for all genres at this. And I've invited people to bring their works in progress, and we can discuss those and some of the world building challenges, character development challenges, plotting challenges that they may have.
Perfect. I'll be sure to do some posts about that on my social media to help promote it for you.
Thanks.
But go ahead, Robert. Where can everybody find you at?
They can find me at on IG. It's Robert K. JEFFREY, Robert K. JEFFREY. Website is robertkjeffrey.com, robertkjeffrey.com. And that's about it.
Perfect.
Well, since Glenn got on my case about promoting stuff, all right, let me go ahead and quickly mention the stuff. Is that the city of Tucker is going to be having their Juneteenth Jubilee here at North Lake Mall, where I'm located, and they're actually looking for panelists and also vendors. All right, and for right now, one of the things and stuff that we've got going on is that I've got a director from the MCU who is going to be here, who's worked on both, Ironheart and Daredevil, along with some guy named Glenn Parris, and they're going to be talking to people about working in the MCU and giving more background information about being an author and being a director in film and working in the MCU universe.
That's
That's
awesome.
gonna be a fun time.
I'm always doing something for the community. As I say, as soon as one of you guys get that Oscar invite, I want a seat. I want an excuse to put on a suit, go to LA, and be there with the Oscars.
Tony, you've got an open invitation if it ever happens to me.
Yeah, if I'm ever nominated for anything, for whatever Blerdography can be nominated for, I'll personally fly you out. Just because you've been a big supporter of the channel. But thank you all so much for coming on. This was a very interesting topic. I didn't think it would be so Star Wars heavy, but why not? It's Star Wars Day. It was a great conversation.
You got Battlestar Galactica in there?
Yeah, a little bit.
That's true. And Matrix and Alien.
And Aliens.
But it's so much within the sci-fi genre that we can discuss. Like, we can just pick and choose things. So we'll definitely have more future episodes about this very topic, but I definitely want to jump into an Afrofuturism episode. So I'm going to work with my team and get that going and have some of y'all back on. But for everybody else, this has been Blerdkast Live. We will be taking the next couple of weeks off because we are preparing for what I like to call my personal heaven, and that's the start of con season officially with all the cons that are coming up in the month of May with Ranger Stop and Pop, DreamHack, MomoCon, and then so many more conventions over the summer.
How are they doing MomoCon and DreamHack at the same time? That just seems like bad scheduling.
FIFA World Cup.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's great.
Atlanta
trying to make that money.
Hey, has got it all.
Yeah.
There's like all y'all nerds can just have y'all stuff on the same 2 weekends, and we're gonna do FIFA for 2 months. And then after that, you can have your little Dragon Con, and y'all be fine. So we're gonna be very busy for the rest of this month. So please, if you have not, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to Moana Nui and Blerdography because we are doing the most this month. At MomoCon, we will be going live all 4 days. RJ is going to be there. She's going to have an hour live stream. We're going to get that together. Dana's going to be there. A bunch of people is going to be there. So I hope to see y'all there. And until then, peace.
Yeah. Love it how you move it, how you wind it up. We can jump into it, we can line it up. We can stay slow with you, me. We can stay slow with you, me. Yeah. Be somebody tonight, doing that dance, digging that dance. I know. Be somebody tonight, be somebody tonight. Pull up on me. We've got so much to see. Maybe I can show you now. Take your time with the top down. Baby, I don't wanna hit the friend zone. Boy, like I'm in the friend zone.